They say family is the one thing money cannot buy. Philip Udinese proved them right. He didn't buy his. He simply buried it. The Udinese estate had a heartbeat. You could feel it in the warmth that rose from the copper vats, in the low hum of machinery that never slept, in the smell of dark cocoa that clung to every wall like a memory refusing to leave. On the night everything changed, Landro Udinese wasn't thinking about empires. He was thinking about his brother. He had cracked the formula: 15 years of trial, of failure, of stubborn love poured into a single vial, and the first person he wanted to look in the eyes when he held it up to the light was Philip. Philip was already in the room. He wasn't there to celebrate. He was there because celebration had an expiration date, and Philip had been counting down to it for a very long time. Landro didn't see it coming, not because he was blind, but because a man who has given everything to someone cannot imagine that person keeping score. The blow came from behind. The empire changed hands before the vial hit the floor. "You are always too generous," Philip said, stepping over his brother's body with the careful precision of a man who had rehearsed this moment. "Generous men don't survive." By 3 in the morning, Serafina Udinese was standing in a driveway in the rain, for children clutched against her body, a gun at her back, and a single instruction: disappear or finish what he started. She took nothing but a locket and a notebook she had sewn into the lining of her coat. The world was told there had been a fire. A terrible, devastating fire. The papers mourned. The industry grieved. Philip accepted their condolences with the quiet dignity of a grieving brother. For 15 years, the Udinese name belonged to him. He should have burned the notebook. The last thing Landro Udinese ever tasted was copper. Not chocolate. Not the triumphant sweetness of 15 years of sacrifice finally perfected in a single vial. Copper. The cold, brutal taste of his own blood pooling beneath his cheek on the laboratory floor, while his brother straightened his cufflinks above him. He had called Philip first. Before his wife. Before God. "Philip, I did it. Come down. Come see." And Philip had come not with joy, but with a decision he had already made long before that phone rang. The blow had been so sudden, so practiced, that Landro's mind refused to believe it for 3 full seconds. He kept thinking it was an accident. He kept waiting for Philip to kneel down, to panic, to say his name. Philip said nothing. He simply picked up the vial, studied it in the light, and slipped it into his breast pocket like a business card. The fire was set at midnight. Serafina smelled the smoke before she heard the screams. She ran for the children first, always the children, dragging 4 small, half-sleeping bodies down a back staircase, while the east wing turned orange behind them. She didn't know Landro was already gone. She was still calling his name into the smoke when 2 men she had never seen stepped out of the dark and pressed a gun against the back of her youngest daughter's head. "Run," they told her. "Run, and don't stop running." She ran. Through the storm. Through the mud. Through the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself, it simply replaces everything inside you, quietly, like smoke filling a room. She ran with a locket around her neck and a notebook sewn into her coat. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Philip had sent a 3rd man ahead of her. Welcome to Roses and Revolvers, where no one leaves untouched. If this story had your heart racing, you already know you can't stop here. Subscribe now, because the next confession? It's darker. And you won't want to hear about it from someone else. Drop your location in the comments. I want to know who's brave enough to stay. 15 years had been very kind to Philip Udinese. That was what the magazine said. The Chocolate King. 3 cover features in 18 months. A net worth that had tripled under his visionary leadership. The velvet crown now shipped to 42 countries, its signature gold packaging sitting in the windows of luxury boutiques from Milan to Manhattan. Philip had built something magnificent on top of his brother's grave, and the world had applauded every brick. What the magazines didn't print was what happened at 3 a.m. They didn't write about the way he refused to let the kitchen staff use Landro's original blend anywhere in the building, not because it was obsolete, but because the smell of it did something to him. Something unhinged. Something that made him grip the edge of his desk and breathe through his teeth until it passed. They didn't write about the sleeping pills, or the cameras he'd installed in every corridor of the estate, or the way he sometimes stood at the laboratory door, the rebuilt one, the clean one, and simply stared at it, unable to make himself go inside. He told himself it was grief. Grief was respectable. Grief made sense. Then the sabotage started. First, a shipment of raw cocoa, his finest, sourced from a supplier no competitor should have even known about, arrived contaminated. Useless. Then a second supplier canceled without explanation, citing a better offer from a company no one in the industry had ever heard of. Then one of his board members pulled him aside after a quarterly meeting, voice low, face tight. Someone had leaked their proprietary pricing structure to the press. Philip had every leak investigated, every employee audited, every contract reviewed. They found nothing. What they did find, slipped beneath his office door one morning and signed, was a single chocolate square wrapped in black foil. It tasted exactly like Landro's original blend. The apartment smelled like cocoa and quiet fury. It was a modest place, 3 rooms, 1 window that faced a brick wall, a kitchen table that had hosted more war councils than meals. A map of the Velvet Crown's entire supply chain was pinned across one wall, annotated in 4 different colors of ink. For different handwritings. For different kinds of hunger. Dante had been 17 when they ran. He was 32 now, and every year of it lived in his jaw, in the deliberate stillness of a man who had learned to turn grief into discipline. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. When Philip's men had come looking for them 6 years ago in Lisbon, it was Dante who made sure they never reported back. Lucia sat cross-legged on the floor, 3 laptops open, her fingers moving across keyboards like a pianist mid-concerto. She had taught herself everything: networks, encryption, corporate architecture, in internet cafes across 4 countries. She was already inside 2 of Philip's subsidiary accounts. She hadn't told the others yet how deep she'd gotten. Matteo stood at the small stove, doing what he always did when the tension in the room became unbearable. He cooked chocolate. Not for comfort, for precision. Every batch a practice run. Every flavor profile a letter to his dead father, written in sugar and smoke. And Bianca, beautiful, composed, devastating Bianca, sat before a mirror rehearsing the smile she would wear when she walked back into the world that had erased her. She had been 4 years old the night they fled. She remembered nothing of that night. She remembered everything of what it cost them. Serafina stood in the doorway watching her children and said nothing. Then her phone buzzed. 1 message. No name. He knows someone is coming. He just doesn't know it's you. She wore black. Not morning black, armor black. The boardroom of the Velvet Crown occupied the entire 40th floor, all glass and cold light, designed to make visitors feel small. Serafina Udinese, introduced that morning as Elena Voss, private acquisitions, sat at the far end of the table and felt nothing but the steady, measured rhythm of 15 years finally exhaling. The other investors barely glanced at her. She was quiet, composed. Just another wealthy ghost in an expensive chair. Philip entered at 9 a.m. sharp, the way men who have stolen kingdoms always enter rooms, like the arrows them something. He shook hands down the line, laughing at something his CFO said, already performing before he'd fully sat down. Serafina kept her eyes on the folder in front of her until she heard his voice go silent. She looked up then, and she let him see her. The color didn't drain from Philip's face gradually. It left all at once, like a light switched off. His hand, mid-extension toward the chair, simply stopped. His CFO said his name once, twice. Philip didn't hear it. He was looking at a dead woman, a woman he had sent into a storm 15 years ago and never confirmed was gone, because confirmation would have meant confession. He sat down. Slowly. Like a man lowering himself onto broken glass. Serafina opened her folder, clicked her pen, and said, in a voice as smooth and dark as Landro's original blend. "Shall we discuss the company's future?" The meeting lasted 2 hours. She said very little. She needed to say very little. The damage was already done. What Philip didn't know was that Lucia had been inside his private server since 7 a.m. And she had just found the file he'd named The Fire. Matteo had been chasing his father's ghost for 15 years. Not metaphorically. Literally, through dog-eared pages of a water-stained notebook, through margin notes written in Landro's cramped, urgent handwriting, through 100 failed batches that came close, but never close enough. Chocolate has memory. It holds the hand of the person who created it. Matteo had learned that the hard way, in every cold kitchen, in every rented room, in every moment he pressed a failed square to his tongue and tasted only his own inadequacy. The night he finally got it right, he didn't celebrate. He sat down on the kitchen floor and wept. It was exact. The dark bloom of the roast, the whisper of something floral underneath, the finish that lingered 2 full seconds longer than any competitor had ever managed to replicate. It was Landro. All of him, distilled into a single square of chocolate. Matteo had brought his father back the only way he knew how. They packaged it without a brand name. Just a black box, a gold ribbon, and a card that read, "The original blend." As it was always meant to taste. Lucia handled the distribution, 30 boxes, 30 of the most influential food journalists in Europe. No press release. No company name. Nothing to trace. The internet caught fire within 48 hours. Who made this? How does a nameless brand produce what the Velvet Crown hasn't tasted like in 15 years? Food critics called it a revelation. Former Udinese employees went on record saying it matched what they remembered from Landro's era exactly. The story spread faster than Philip's legal team could contain it. By Friday, the hashtag who made this was trending in 9 countries. By Saturday, Philip had fired his entire marketing department. By Sunday, someone had sent Serafina a photograph, Philip, at his desk, holding one of the black boxes. His hands were shaking. The first time Philip saw Landro, it was in a mirror. He told himself it was exhaustion. Sleep deprivation. The particular cruelty of a guilty mind turning shadows into shapes. He poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, didn't drink it, and stood in the hallway of the estate for 20 minutes, staring at the place his brother's reflection had been. The mirror showed nothing but a man getting old. It happened again on Tuesday. Then Thursday. Then every night that week. Always the same, a figure at the edge of his peripheral vision, standing still in the way only Landro had ever stood still, with that quiet, patient dignity that had made Philip want to scream even as a child. By the time Philip turned fully to face it, the hallway was empty. Just him, the cameras, and the sound of his own breathing. He stopped sleeping in the estate. It didn't help. He hired the investigators on a Wednesday, 3 separate firms, none aware of the others, each handed a photograph of Elena Voss and a number that ensured loyalty. Find out who she is. Find out who sent the chocolate. Find out everything. He gave them 72 hours before he started making calls that went beyond investigation. The first firm reported back in 40 hours. The lead investigator's voice, when he called, was strange. Careful. The kind of careful that meant the man was deciding whether to keep the money or keep his conscience. "Mr. Udinese," he said slowly. "The woman at the board meeting. The children behind the chocolate." Asterisk. A long pause. "They're not newcomers, sir. The eldest son, we ran his prints against an old household registry from the estate." Philip's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. "They're Landro's. They took Bianca on a Tuesday morning, outside a coffee shop on Via Mercanti. 2 men. Professional. Fast. The kind of clean, practiced grab that said this wasn't their first time." Bianca didn't scream. She had been trained not to, trained for exactly this moment, in exactly this kind of street, because Serafina had always known Philip would eventually stop being afraid and start being dangerous. What Philip's men didn't know was that Dante had been 3 steps behind his sister since dawn. He'd felt it that morning, something in the air, the particular stillness of a street with too many parked cars and not enough pedestrians. He had texted Bianca one word, yellow. Their code for someone is watching. She had texted back a single period. Understood. So when the men grabbed her, Bianca didn't fight. She let them feel the victory of it, let them relax into the assumption that this was easy, that the girl was terrified, that the job was done. Dante was inside the van before it reached the end of the block. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not something Philip's men had been prepared for. Dante hadn't spent a decade in grief. He had spent a decade in preparation. Every dark morning, every brutal training session, every night he lay awake reciting the faces of the men who had pressed a gun to his baby sister's head when she was 4 years old. Both men were restrained, disarmed, and conscious enough to deliver a message. Dante leaned close to the one who was breathing better and spoke very quietly. "Tell Philip his brother says hello." By nightfall, a photograph arrived on Philip's private phone, his 2 men, zip-tied in the back of his own van. The second photograph was worse. It was Philip's home address, written in Landro's handwriting, taken directly from the notebook he thought had burned. Most people who find this channel don't realize what they're about to get pulled into. Subscribe now before you miss the next story. Lucia found it at 2 a.m., the way all devastating things are found, quietly, in the dark, when no one is prepared for what comes next. It had been buried inside a deprecated server partition, nested beneath 3 layers of encrypted misdirection that would have defeated anyone who didn't know how Landro thought. But Lucia knew. She had spent 15 years reading and rereading her father's notebook, studying the architecture of his mind, the way he hid tenderness inside precision, the way he always kept one secret deeper than all the others. The file was labeled simply, "For Serafina. If something happens." Lucia's hands stopped moving over the keyboard. She opened it. 47 minutes of footage. A fixed camera, mounted above the laboratory door, positioned precisely because Landro had already been afraid, had already seen something in Philip's eyes that he hadn't let himself name yet. The footage was clear. The timestamp was undeniable. Every second of it was the kind of evidence that didn't just convict a man, it destroyed him. Lucia watched 11 seconds of it and closed the laptop. She sat in the dark for a long time before she called Serafina. They played Philip the first 60 seconds by anonymous transmission the following morning. No message, no demand, just the footage. His response came within the hour, not through lawyers, not through intermediaries, but through a direct call to Serafina's pseudonym line. His voice, for the first time in 15 years, was stripped of performance. "You want to burn me down," he said. "I'll burn everything first. The company. The legacy. Every brick your husband ever touched. I will leave you nothing but ash and a memory." Serafina was quiet for a moment. "Landro built things that survive fire," she said. "You of all people should know that." She hung up. What she hadn't told Philip, what none of them had told him, was that the footage had already been copied to 17 separate locations. And one of them was inside his own building. The Velvet Crown Gala was Philip's masterpiece of self-mythology. 800 guests. 3 Michelin-starred caterers. A string quartet playing in the foyer beneath a chandelier that cost more than most people's homes. Every surface draped in gold and deep burgundy, the company colors, Landro's colors, worn tonight by the man who had stolen them without a single person in the room knowing the truth. Philip stood at the center of it all, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, wearing the easy confidence of someone who had finally, completely, convinced himself he deserved this. At 9:47 p.m., the doors opened. Nobody announced them. Nobody needed to. They simply walked in, 5 of them, in black, moving through the glittering crowd with the unhurried certainty of people who had been waiting 15 years for this exact moment and refused to waste it on urgency. Serafina led. Dante flanked her left, Lucia her right, Matteo and Bianca behind, a formation so composed, so deliberate, it stopped conversations mid-sentence. The room didn't know why it went quiet. It simply did, the way rooms do when something shifts in the atmosphere, when the air itself recognizes that history is turning over. Serafina was wearing Landro's locket. She had never worn it publicly before tonight. Philip saw them from across the ballroom. The champagne glass in his hand tilted without him noticing, a thin stream of gold running over his fingers onto the marble floor. His security team moved immediately, 3 men stepping forward, hands reaching for earpieces. Dante looked at the security team with an expression so calm it was its own kind of threat. None of them took another step. Then the lights dimmed for the award presentation, the room's attention drawn to the stage, to the enormous screen flickering to life above the podium. Lucia, standing near the AV panel, looked at Serafina. Serafina gave the smallest nod. The screen lit up with 9 p.m., 15 years ago. The room watched in absolute silence. All 800 of them, the dignitaries, the investors, the journalists, the industry elite in their finest clothes, stood motionless as the screen above the podium showed a man being murdered by his brother in a laboratory that smelled like roasted cocoa and rain. No narration. No title card. Just 47 minutes of truth that Landro Udinese had hidden in the dark, waiting patiently for the night it would finally breathe. Philip broke on the 14th minute. He moved toward the exit with the desperate, graceless lurch of a man whose entire architecture has collapsed at once. He made it 6 steps before the doors opened from outside and the officers entered, not rushed, not theatrical, simply inevitable. The handcuffs caught the chandelier light as they closed around his wrists. Someone in the crowd gasped. Someone else began to cry. Philip said nothing. He looked, in that final moment, exactly like what he was, a hollow man who had spent 15 years furnishing the inside of someone else's life and calling it his own. Serafina walked to the podium slowly. She didn't have notes. She didn't need them. She had been writing this speech in her chest for 15 years. "My husband built this company on one belief," she said, her voice steady as cathedral stone. "That something made with integrity will always outlast something made with greed. Tonight, we return the velvet crown to that belief. Not for us. For him." The applause began somewhere in the back and moved forward like a wave. 3 days later, the 5 of them stood at Landro's grave in the early morning quiet, no cameras, no lawyers, no empire. Just a family, a locket, and a single square of chocolate placed at the base of the headstone. Matteo had made it from the original blend. The last of the notebook secrets, finally given back to the man they belonged to. Serafina pressed her hand against the stone and closed her eyes. Behind her, Lucia's phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. Landro had a 6th child. One Philip hid. "And they've been watching you since the gala."